I'm Hal Hickel. I'm an animation director at Industrial Light and Magic from San Francisco.
Okay, lessons learned. Life isn't fair. Many of you probably already know that. The only reason I mention that is because it's good to remind yourself of this periodically, lest you get too bitter about things not going your way and feel like the universe is out to get you. It's not. It doesn't care about you. It just does its thing, and you're part of it, and it's useful to remember that from time to time. You aren't owed a career in visual effects, but being a little bit angry about it is okay. Just don't let it consume you. That anger will help you at certain times to kind of push to get where you want to be. But again, too much of it is toxic, so try and keep that in check. What are you waiting for? The great invitation. This is something that my mother would say to me when she was waiting for me to get my self together and do some chore or something that she was patiently waiting for me to do. But it's useful in the sense that if there's something you want, you've got to get on with it. Don't wait. Don't create roadblocks for yourself. If you want to make a movie and you don't have the DSLR camera that you think is all that, well, shoot it on your phone or write it in the meantime. If you want to animate, start animating with flipbooks or get Blender, it's free, or whatever, but find ways around it and get on with it. Be persistent, I think that's one everyone knows. Be ready so that when good fortune strikes, you can take advantage of it. Setbacks, happen, but they often do lead to opportunities, and I'll give a couple examples later on. Be grateful, and on that note, there's my brother and I. That's me on the left. I was a better fisherman, but my brother has always been the better artist. He's just more of a fine artist. He always drew well, he can sculpt, he can paint, he can do everything. And he's really the reason that I'm in a creative field. I would watch him do, and I would do. So I will always thank him and for that, and love him for being my brother and many others.
What is the movie you are the most proud of?
There are a couple, actually. I think some of my favorites, obviously, the second Pirates of the Caribbean film, we had a lot of big challenges on that, and it was a great experience all the way around. Gore's great to work with. We had really big challenges, and we were rewarded. We won an Oscar for that work, and Davy Jones, I think, still looks great now. So that's definitely a highlight. But Rango also was really an extraordinary project. We had never done an animated feature at ILM before, so we really had to scale up and figure out how to solve a lot of new problems that we're not used to. So that film sticks out. And Pacific Rim and Iron Man, two other projects that really were just great experiences and terrific films. So yeah.
And your personal favorite?
That's really hard to say. They're all they all have such special attributes about them, and memories attached to them. It's hard to pick just one. It's sort of like saying, which child is your favorite. But certainly, Pirates 2 was probably, if I had to take all things considered, I'd have to and pick one film. I suppose it would be that film. But I've been lucky. I've really had a lot of great experiences working on films, and very few that, really none that I regretted working on, and very few even that I have any negative feelings at all about the films or the experience of working on them. So I've been lucky that way. Not everyone can say that. So.
Chapter 1, I am bored. No, all right. Now, we won't get that granular. I'll skip ahead a bit. Like a lot of people in my field, I was inspired by a lot of this kind of thing at a very young age. My brother and I were actually obsessed with the old Universal horror movies and watched them whenever they would come on television. But this is the film that really sparked my interest. And if any of you were in the Michael Giacchino talk yesterday, I was really tickled to see that he also cited King Kong as sort of the inciting incident that set him on his path. But it definitely was for me. Now, of course, this is in the era before the internet. And there weren't a lot of texts around then that would tell you how things were done. But fortunately for this film, there were 2 good books. I still have mine. They're quite dog-eared now and worn, but I still have them. And these books had a lot of useful information in it and got me to start making my own stop-motion films. Also this magazine, Forrest J. Ackerman's Famous Monsters of Filmland. And this photo, which was actually from one of those 2 books. And this photo, for me, really made it real. Like, I could really imagine what it would feel like to hold that puppet in my hands, and it really took it from an abstract idea to something that was very physical in my brain, which I think is super helpful when young people are gravitating toward a profession or a calling of some kind. Things that make it, meeting people who work in that profession is key. It helps, again, make it real for them. So my mom again, she helped me make this Kong puppet. It was made from what we in the States had an action figure called G.I. Joe. It was about this big. So she stitched together his costume, and I took the face off my plastic King Kong model kit, put it on there. I don't know why I painted the eyes red, but I still have the puppet. So this is going to be super hard to see, but this was a first little test, and I didn't know anything. Like, I didn't even know about tie downs on stop motion puppets, so he just shuffles around because otherwise he'd fall over. You could barely see him there. And why on earth I was shooting him against a black curtain, it makes no sense. And I had just like one little light. But in my head, what I thought I was doing was this. You know, I was just like, this is going to be amazing. And then you wait 2 weeks and you get the film back from the lab and you're like, oh. But I stuck with it. And, you know, full circle, many years later, I did get to do some sword fighting skeletons, so that was awesome. All right, so steady diet of, what you'd expect for someone who does what I do for a living. A lot of science fiction, fantasy, crazy exploitation films from the 70s of all kinds. Dystopian future films are something I really liked. I really like these movies with dark futures. And then, you know, also, well, I guess these are both dark futures as well. And these 2. I guess a lot of them were. Maybe I was kind of a dark kid, I don't know. But, and then I got into animation, and especially, I liked all forms of animation. I'd see the latest Disney film, whatever, but this is when I really started to get into stuff that was a little weirder or a little further afield, and kind of soak that stuff up. And then right at the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s was just this crazy, you know, cornucopia of amazing genre films that, in terms of just visions on film, but also in terms of visual effects and even just sort of kooky, kitschy stuff like Moonraker. It was just an instant crash. It was kind of an amazing time to be me, I think. So these 2 films came out in the same summer and took me from being kind of focused on stop motion animation to be interested just generally in visual effects. I wanted to do all of it. I wanted to know how they did that, and all about this, and the stop motion, well, at least the stop motion I recognize, but everything else, you know, how did they make the star streak, and how did they shoot that, and Luke's lightsaber, and, you know, all this stuff. So it really broadened my interest in visual effects. Also, up to this point, I had been, kind of had dual interests. I wanted to be an astronaut, was a serious NASA nerd, but I also was interested in visual effects, and this film kind of set my path for me. And the other thing is that I was living on a ranch in Colorado, and so I was a kid a farm boy who wanted to go to the stars, either the literal stars or the ones in Hollywood. So I identified very strongly with Luke, but I was interested in how they made the film as the fantasy inside the film. So it was a big deal for me, as you'd expect. Wrote a letter to Lucasfilm with a whole big idea for a sequel. Got a very nice rejection letter on this super cool Ralph McQuarrie letterhead.
Which approach do you prefer? The live-action effects animation or the pure animation?
You know, animated features are super fun. They're a lot of work, super fun. If I had to pick one, though, I'd probably stick with live action and visual effects, just because, you know, Ray Harryhausen, King Kong, those were the things that got me interested in this in the first place. So putting what we hope are realistic creatures into a live action film is still really exciting for me. But we all at ILM love working on Rango, and not a day goes by that somebody doesn't stop and ask me when we're going to do something like that again. So, I know we'll all jump at the chance when that happens. So.
Oh yeah, CGI is running my career. Part one, there are a couple chapters to this as well. What I didn't know as I was charging ahead toward my bright future as a motion graphics person, using this sort of old school photochemical processes, was that digital stuff, CG in a couple different forms, but this is one of them, was taking over that business entirely within just a few years. So all the companies in LA that had been doing the kind of work I liked were being wiped away, and this is what you were seeing all over the airwaves, which I found to be hideously ugly. But pretty soon, this was all you saw on the airwaves, instead of those really beautiful, luminous, glittery graphics. And so that kind of killed that path for me. Don't stay in a bad job too long. I stayed at that little shop doing titles for about 4 years, and really that was too long. I should have gotten out and found something else. Yes, I had access to some cool equipment and I was learning, but there was only so much I could learn there on my own with no one to teach me. And my boss was a jerk, so I stayed too long. Lesson learned. So there they are, California raisins. Learned a lot here. Now I wasn't sort of by myself at a little company. I was around in a studio full of really great, really talented folks. Here's Bill Feasterman working on Return to Oz, which was a little before my time at the studio. But I put this slide in there a little bit to talk about, just briefly to touch on the change in technology over the years. You saw the Oxberry, those are pretty much no more. Stop motion nowadays, you're going to have a little tiny SLR instead of a great big Mitchell camera like that. And instead of all this stuff, you're going to have a Dragon frame grabber that's capturing frames, right from the taking camera. Well, we couldn't do that then, so we had these cheap little black and white security cameras, and you'd grab like 2 of them and a couple little aluminum tripods, and you bring them out on the set, and you put them on either side of the puppet with the film camera here. And then you have a couple of these, I don't know if my laser pointer can see, but a couple of these cheap little black and white TVs, and you plug the cameras into them. And so they'd have a couple different views of the puppet. You'd move the puppet a little bit. You'd outline the puppet with a water-based marker on the screen of the TV, and then move it a little bit, and then you could see how far you had moved it. And then you'd outline it again, shoot the next frame, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we did it back then. And if we had reference footage to study for the shot, we had an actual film moviola sitting there, and we had a clip of film, and we'd run it back and forth through the moviola. It was like so primitive compared to today. I can't even believe it. But anyway, so that was my experience there. And another thing I got super interested in was operating motion control systems, camera motion control systems. And right about that time, this guy, Dave Daniels, came on board at Vinton's as a commercials director, and he had a couple of really nice little motion control rigs for stop motion work. And that really kind of upgraded what we could do there, and I learned how to run those and how to program not program, but operate the software to create camera moves with the motion control system.
In your early years, you have done some stop motion shorts. What do you think about stop motion?
I love watching it. I'm not patient enough to do it anymore. I don't think, but I still love it. I've got some old cameras in my office, and I like the whole history of it, and I love to watch new examples of it, but I don't think I'll be doing it myself anytime soon. Yeah.
CGI is really my career. Part 2. Okay, so I'm at Vinton's. I'm doing stop motion animation, and now I really am focused on character work. I'm really trying to be a good character animator, and my plan is to build up a reel of this, largely commercial work that we're doing there, TV commercials, and then go down and work for Phil Tippett or at ILM doing stuff like Dragon Slayer and the Ebersisk in Willow or RoboCop or that kind of stuff. Except that this happened. So I saw that and I was like, okay, well, I don't know anything about computer animation, and it seems like it's a bunch of people in lab coats with computer science degrees, and it seems a little late for me to be going back to school, and plus I don't really think I'm smart enough for that particular path. So math was never really my thing. So what to do? Well, again, setbacks, one door closes, another door opens.
How do you understand that an animation is finished and it is looking good?
Well, I mean, experience, education, going to, an art program and then just working and kind of learning and observing. Animators spend a lot of time observing real life and kind of soaking that up. And then, don't forget, we're always, particularly in visual effects, we're always working with a director who has, a vision that they're trying to achieve. And part of the goal of making it good enough is making sure the director feels that it's good enough, so that's part of it as well. But you develop a feeling for things over time, and we all have a slightly different take on it. I mean, that's one of the good things and sometimes maddening things about this business is there's certainly no scientific way to know that a shot is good enough. It's kind of a matter of opinion, and so you look at it and you say, that feels good to me. And then you may show it to the director, and they may say, that's not at all what I wanted. I want, okay, and then sometimes the animator will surprise me with something I didn't expect, and well, that's not what I was expecting, but that's pretty cool. And then we'll show that to the director. So it's it's kind of, you just have to go with your feelings on it and be open to new ideas, which is hard sometimes because when you get bound up in an idea that you think that's the solution, and then something comes in from over here, it's useful to be able to be open to that new thing and not just reject it because it wasn't what you were expecting. And I'll frequently, even if I'm not sure that what the animator has done is going to fly with the director, if I think it's a worthy idea, I'll absolutely show it to the director. And if the director likes it, I'll take credit for it. No, I'll give the animator credit, of course. And conversely, if I say to the animator, do this instead of that, and then I show it to the director, and the director says, I don't like that. Why is it doing that? I'll be sure to say, that was me. I thought we should do that because of this, that, and the other, rather than, throw the animator under the bus for making that choice. And that's important. It's good for your animation team to understand that, you're going to shine light on them when they do something good, and you're going to take the hit for it when you make a bad decision. Yeah.
Lucky break number 2 came in the form of Mike Belzer. Mike Belzer was a stop motion animator in the Bay Area. And what was going on right now that I didn't realize was that Pixar was making their first feature-length film, Toy Story, and they were a bit behind, and they were really trying to just hoover up every animator they could find. And back then, there weren't a ton of CG animators all over the place. There weren't a bunch of schools, turning out experienced CG animators. So mostly they were hiring traditional animators from different backgrounds, and they'd gotten all the stop motion and other kinds of animators from the Bay Area already and other places. And so Mike put in a call to someone he knew at Vinton's, Teresa Drilling, who's a terrific stop motion animator, director still. And she didn't have any interest in CG, but she knew that I was yearning to try and figure out how to make that next step. So she said, send down your reel. Evidently, they don't require much for animators. They don't require any computer experience. They'll show you how to use the software. So I sat down a reel that would never get me hired there today. But again, it was a lucky break. The timing was exactly right, and I got hired. And it turns out I loved it. Because I knew some stop motion folks who had made that transition because it was a job that was available to them and it was a bit begrudging, and they didn't really like it. I found that I really liked it, so it was a great thing for me. So look how happy I am with my King Ghidorah toy at my desk, riding scooters around the hallways, working on Toy Story. Another nod to the old equipment, we're using this super expensive Silicon Graphics workstation, super high-end, and my iPhone's probably more powerful than that thing is now. I mean, I don't know for sure, but my guess is it probably is. And we had this separate thing for recording frames. When you rendered out a shot, it would grab them off the screen and put them on this, sort of like a TiVo, put them on this disc recorder, and then those could be sent out to the network, which was, again, seems crazy now, but that was what it was done then. But one of the things I figured out when I was there, it was another great stroke of luck. As I was learning to animate characters in the computer, I realized that something I'd done previously was great preparation for it, and that was doing motion control work. Because in motion control work, you have a character, which is essentially this big robotic machine with a camera on it. And you drive it down the track, and you raise it up the boom, and you pan, and you tilt, and you set the focus, and you set keys on all those axes. And then you go a little later in the shot, You drive it up to this end and you lower it down and you adjust the pan and tilt and set keys, and then you get splines and you adjust the splines for the in-betweens. And I realized that, once I was animating in Menvy, it was way before it was called, was it Marionette now, I think, but Menvy, that, the same thing. Now that's not all there is to character animation, obviously, but that I was soaking up like a sponge from, Pete Docter and Ash Brannon and Rich Quaid and Glenn McQueen and, the whole rest of the just insanely talented group of people there. And so I probably learned more in my short time at Pixar about character animation than I've learned in any similar chunk of time since.
How did you come to create Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean?
Well, we had an experience on the first Pirates film where we had these cursed pirates, and when they appear in the moonlight, they turn into skeletons. And on that film, we didn't have any method of doing motion capture on set. So typically, let's say we have a shot of Orlando Bloom sword fighting with a skeleton. We'd shoot that once with Orlando fighting against the stunt person. Then we'd shoot it again with him just doing the same fight choreography against nothing, against air. And the idea was that was supposed to be the hero plate, the chosen version of the shot. But quite often the version where he's fighting the stuntman was better because their swords are actually hitting together and he's reacting to another actor. And so when those shots were chosen, we'd have to paint out the stuntman. And then on top of that, whichever version we chose, we'd then have to do motion capture of the skeleton pirate later on the motion capture stage separate. And that just really wasn't ideal because it was hard to get the sync just right. You'd have to mess with the animation a lot to get it to sync up. And the more you mess with motion capture, it's quite easy to break so that it doesn't look natural anymore. So in Pirates 2, one of our goals was to have motion capture that we could do on a ship at sea, in a jungle, on a mountaintop, on a stage, anywhere. Because we wanted to have Bill Nighy, the actor playing Davy Jones, we wanted him to be doing his work on set with the other actors during first unit photography, not separately on a motion capture stage. So that was thing one. Thing two was the tentacle beard. We knew that there was no way we could hand animate all those tentacles and ever get the movie done. We'd still be working on the film today if we'd done that. And so we had to build a simulation engine that didn't just react to his motion, but it did have to do that. But then they would also collide with his body, collide with each other. The tentacles were also sticky, so if they collided with each other and then peeled apart, they'd peel apart like things that were sticky rather than just like this. But more than that, they had to be alive at the same time that they were reacting to all those forces. So coming up with behaviors for them that felt like what tentacles should be doing, but at the same time having them react to each other to the point where they might even wrap around each other and get kind of tangled up and then pull apart and things like that. That was just extraordinarily complicated and it took us longer to get it right than we thought it would. So there was a very anxious part in the schedule where we had thought by that time we would be finaling shots and it would look great, and we weren't there yet. But when it did get there, it worked remarkably well. In fact, to the point where on the third film, if we had Davy Jones shots, we could give those shots in terms of the simulation of his beard, we could give them to quite junior artists because the engine worked so well. It didn't take a really experienced creature dev artist to do those shots. And so that was gratifying. And the work really was elevated so much because of that. Because we had an early shot of him that we had to do for a trailer that we had to do well before the beard was working. And so that one we had to just kind of hack it together. And so I know how it would have been without that engine working. And that's down to James Tooley, who was our head of creature dev, and Karen Peters, as she worked out all of the behaviors. And James was the architect of the whole simulation engine. It really worked out great.
And I got to be that guy, although you never know it because you can't see my face, but that's me. Again, with the sometimes time. This was the next project up. And Dennis was doing it, and Ang Lee was going to direct it, and Ang was hot off of Crouching Tiger, and so it seemed like this was the project to be on. And Dennis told me that Ang really wanted his anim suit to be at his side all the way through pre-production, all during shooting on location, which is obviously an amazing opportunity. But I had to say no to it because this happened. Oh, no, sorry, not that. This happened. Sorry, I don't know why my cat is in there. My son was born, he was brand new, and there was just no way I was gonna leave home for 6 months. I said I'm not gonna do it. And it wasn't even, it was hard to say no, but it really wasn't a choice, there just wasn't a choice there. But I kind of thought, man, I'm really shooting myself in the head here in terms of my career. They're not going to give me another good project. They're going to, this is going to be it. Again, setbacks often can often lead to opportunities. So the next script they presented me with was this. Now, looking at it now, it seems like, oh man, awesome, you won the jackpot. Well, it didn't seem like it at the time because they had made one movie based on a ride up to that point. It was a Country Bear film, which wasn't awesome. There hadn't been a good pirate movie in decades, so it was kind of questionable, even though I'm a huge fan of the ride. I love Disneyland, I grew up going to Disneyland. But number one, I was going to get to work with John Knoll. John and I had kind of worked together on the prequels, but not that directly, but we already knew we had kind of a shared interest and sense of humor and so forth, so that was going to be great. And then John said, read the script, wait till you meet Gore, the director, Gore Verbinski, you're going to really like this. So it did turn out to be an awesome thing. So lucky me, and it led to a bunch of great things like this dude and some of that, and no, not that, that. So it, and you just never know. Again, you can have your sort of lowest moment, and then right around the corner can be something awesome. And that doesn't happen all the time, obviously, but it's worth remembering that it's possible. And so, had a pretty good run so far. At the moment, I'm doing this, which has been pretty great. I can't show you anything other than that, because my boss is here, and I like my job. And
Rango, on the other hand, is a full animated movie. What difference did you find in working with and without a real camera?
Yeah, that is the main thing. Everything you see in the frame has to be made by somebody. Every pebble, every that's in the saloon, every bar stool, every wagon wheel, chandelier, somebody has to make that. You don't just walk on set and shoot it. Although in live action, somebody has to make all those things too, but we don't. Yeah. We in visual effects don't tend to think about that. So there's that aspect of it, and then there's also just the style aspects, because frequently in live action films we're chasing realism. It's rare that we're doing characters who move in a stylized, non-realistic way. It happens, but it's rare. Most of the time we're trying to make things look physically real, with real physics and all that. But in an animated film, you can have stylization, not just the design of the characters, but to how they move. And so the freedom to do that was really fun. And everybody had to kind of shift gears and get away from focusing on making things real and figure out how to make things whatever they needed to be. Frequently awkward was the byword that Gore used, even for the sense of humor. So, the characters, the movement tended to have a very specific aesthetic. For instance, in a traditional, more bouncy, cartoony style film, if a character heard their name called off screen, they might do a big kind of thing with like lots of anticipation and bounce and settle. But in Gore's world, if that happens, the character's more liable to kind of, it's very tight and awkward and kind of maybe a little hesitant. So, that was a lot of fun to find and figure out at Gore's direction. So it's just, and the other thing about character animation, I think, between live action visual effects and more, stylized animated films, it's kind of all the same rules, the rules from the 9 Old Men, squash and stretch and good posing and all that, but it's kind of how you're dialing in the levers. It's the same ideas, but you'll still have overlap and cushion and all those kind of things, but you might dial them down and dial up other things. And but I think it's and one isn't harder than the other. I think some people have the misconception perhaps that visual effects animation might be harder because it's supposed to be so realistic, but that's not the case at all. Really well done cartoon animation, paring that down to its essence and finding exactly the right style and exactly the right way to have the characters, emote and move and hold themselves and everything is just as hard to do as more realistic stuff. Just different challenges, really.
Once again, Rob Coma, artist guy in show business. And I bring up Rob again because almost everything I know about being a soup, at least the important things, I learned from Rob. From watching Rob and from Rob kind of coaching Chris and I on Attack of the Clones. He's the most generous, giving person you'll ever have the delight to work with if you get the chance. So a couple of things about the job of anim soup. These 3 words, or well, 1, 3, 4 words. Therapist. What I mean by therapist, this has to do largely with the relationship with the director. And it's not to make it sound like directors are all crazy, but what it has to do with is developing empathy with your director. And that starts, in my opinion, with being on set. Now, anim soups aren't always invited to come on location. Depends on the facility, it depends on the production, it depends on a lot of things. But if you can get that to happen, I recommend it. I find it absolutely crucial, particularly if I'm working with a director I haven't worked before. And it's not just about having props to play with or hanging out with the cast. It's really about observing the director. The first few days on set, I barely open my mouth or try. It's really, I listen to how they talk to their AD, their DP, the actors, whoever they have to interface with. I try to be a fly on the wall and listen. So here's Gareth, obviously on Rogue. And just being around the director and again, listening to how they express themselves, what their sense of humor is, what makes them pissed off, all those things are important. And pretty soon, you'll be best friends. No. But you can start to understand them, and understanding them is a big step toward, understanding them as a human being is a big step toward understanding what they're trying to do in the film and how they want to get there and how you can get there together. It's also important to build relationships with other people who are key players in the work that you're doing, like, for instance, Alan Tudyk with K2SO and Rogue One. So a big part of that therapy job is managing anxiety. And again, I don't mean to make directors sound like a nervous bunch, but they have worries like anyone, and figuring out what those worries are and figuring out strategies for managing that anxiety is super helpful. A term that John Knoll coined is the anxiety gap. And so this is just one aspect, for instance. This has to do with, and quite honestly, I find this anxiety comes more at us from, understandably, from producers and the studios than from the directors themselves, but it can come from directors too. So you got a whole bunch of shots you got to do, you got X amount of time to do them in, and people just naturally kind of want that to be a linear progression. But the reality is, it's a lot more like this. Because you're like, you know, you're solving problems, you're not getting any finals, solving problems, you're still not getting any finals. Then finally, you've got your assets together, you've solved the creative and technical problems, and the machine is running, and boom, it takes off. And that's just how it works. I mean, on big complicated shows, that's much more the norm. And so if you can be honest and transparent about that and find strategies for making people understand exactly why it's taking the amount of time it is and how you plan to get from here to there, it just helps a ton. Another thing is getting things moving, in terms of my job, getting things moving as soon as possible. Because with a character like Rango, for instance, there was an endless design cycle on him. You know, noodling with his scales and his skin and his proportions and his weird little crooked neck and everything. And so I really pushed early on to like, look, I know that the design isn't quite gelled yet, but let's just get a quick rig into an early version of him and start moving him, because we need to see him. People need to understand whether these weird little chameleon eyes with their tiny little openings are going to be super creepy or if we can make them appealing. There were just a bunch of things to be learned from getting him moving, and people just feel better. They feel like, oh, it's happening, you know, this is going to work. Or it could be something like this, you know, Ironmonger from Iron Man. The point is to just, you know, give them hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Clairvoyant, looking way down the road for problems. Don't wait for them to arrive at your front door. There's a scene in Rango where he's in this bottle and he has a bunch of stuff he has to do in here. And I was looking at these boards and I was thinking, you know, I don't think one bottle is going to serve all these different moments, but, you know, on the production list of assets, there's just like, you know, Coke bottle. So I just went through and started figuring out, like, okay, that bottle, that size, that proportion looks good for that moment. But then when he falls into the bottom, that's a much bigger bottle. And then when he gets to the ground, we go inside. Back. That's how big the opening at the end really is, but we need it to be this big for this moment, or some version of this, maybe not that big, but, you know, bigger for the guy to yell at him. And then when he's running in it, it's got to be big enough diameter for him to run inside. So this bottle's a completely different proportion. It's more like what we call a stubby in the States. So the bottle changes shape all through the sequence. And I don't think people really notice it. I hope not. But the point is we needed more than one bottle asset and some other things that hadn't been planned for. And so these are the kind of problems I try to look for and solve way before they get to my doorstep. Again, this was like a previous version of Gypsy Danger. I had to just throw a quick rig in it so I could figure out some camera angles that made Gypsy look big and cool, and also how to inject a little bit of speed into what are otherwise sort of slow motion shots because they're so big they have to move like that. So having stuff go by quickly in the foreground is one way to achieve that. And some of these shots made it into the film.
Could you talk about the research department inside Industrial Light and Magic?
Sure. We have an R&D department, and they service not just the studio where I work in San Francisco, but they're connected with groups at all the other studios we have in Vancouver and London and Singapore and now Sydney. And so these groups are always coming up with new tools, new solutions to doing things. I mean, that's one of the things I love about visual effects is always having new problems to solve, because you'll have a new director who's got something that he or she wants to do that's that they're hoping has never been done before. Like, that's super appealing to people. So that always presents us with new problems. We have to go to R&D and say, we need help with this because the software we have won't do this, or the tools we have won't do this. So it's great to have a group that can solve those problems for you. And to go back to it, but the tentacle beard on Davy, our simulation system at the beginning of the project wasn't capable of doing that. And so we were working with Rod Tedcu at Stanford and the FizzBAM simulation engine, and that had to be hammered on and worked on and upgraded and changed and modified to give us the tools to do his beard. And so that's a good example of our R&D folks working hard to give us new tools to get problems solved.
Davy, of course, required lots of problem solving, and looking down, we started on his tentacle beard at the beginning, and it took us a long time to get it right. So that's another thing, is looking for the hardest problems and really hitting them hard early, because this was absolutely the hardest problem we had to solve on that particular show.
What is your personal definition of animation?
It's kind of the old classic definition of bringing things to life. Although that said, a big chunk of the work on Rogue One was flying spaceships around, doing the space battle. And that's not really about creatures. That is about storytelling, though. So storytelling's a big part of it, for sure. But I think, for me, at the root of it, is kind of being like Dr. Frankenstein, taking the inanimate and maybe something that's slightly weird and even ugly and giving it life to frighten people or make them laugh or whatever. Like that's really at the bottom of it. That's what I love about it.
That's cool. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That's great.
Okay. Good questions.
Thank you for coming to my talk, and to thank you for coming to my talk. My dogs thank you for coming to my talk.